Welcome to this, our second creative conversation with experts in the field of creativity, particularly group creativity at the moment. I'm delighted to be joined by Fraser Trainer. Hi, Fraser, how are you?
Hello, very well, thank you. Really nice to see you. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, oh, well, thank you. Thanks for giving up your Saturday afternoon or part of it. It's particularly sunny today here in Bristol. I don't know how it is with you.
Yeah, beautiful down here near Brighton as well. Lovely
Brighton,
sunshine. Yeah, 10 miles north of Brighton, South Downs territory.
very lovely place in the world to be. I want to introduce you, Fraser, if I may, because we met. I want to say almost a decade ago. It feels like that. Anyway, was it that in a Reading workshop with the Berkshire Maestros?
That's right, yes.
And there was a brief to combine. I seem to remember a classical style with world, and there was this kind of a fusion brief. And I remember two things. Three things. One was there's this kind of hushed aura of marvellousness around Fraser Trainer. We've got Fraser Trainer coming to the workshop. And I thought, oh, great, I can't wait to meet you. So there was that aura, the build-up was great. And secondly, I seem to remember you ignored the brief, you sort of creatively danced around it and came up with this superbly effective piece based on Indian rhythms. In fact, I've squirreled away the resource that you gave me. Here we go, it's Takita.
Yes.
One, Takata, one, two, Takata,
Yeah.
one to two. And you sort of set that to a rag, and it was so complex and impressive. Do you remember that one? Do you use this one often?
I do because that structure there is something I've used a lot because that's gold dust. When you've got something like that, you can use it in different contexts. In that one, of course, the context is very much in its home territory because it is, that is an Indian kind of percussive structure. And so setting it to a rag and really emphasizing that, it, keeps it very much in its location. But of course, you can transplant that kind of rhythmic structure into anything, into any type of music or genre or onto any instrument and, make whatever you will with it. So those little things I think are really valuable to people like you and me. Well, so I'm not surprised that you've kept it. Maybe you've used it as well. Someday.
Yeah, I did shortly after, and I remember, as I say, squirreling it away and putting it into sort of a polythene pocket, thinking, this is gold dust, because we are quite isolated, aren't we, as workshop leaders? It is hard to come about resources, and these recorded conversations are in part to address that and to share the knowledge of experts such as yourself. I can imagine what I'm looking at here, for example, is effectively additive rhythms in a tabla style, which you can then use different scales to bring into whatever world you want.
Well, and I think the key thing about it is it's got complexity, in its structure and in its syncopation and the way the rhythms move around the bar, but it's really easy to learn. And, I know that it would take me between 15 and 20 minutes to teach that to just about any group of young people so that they've got that resource themselves to use creatively. So that's quick, you get, it's great material, it's really rhythmically alive and interesting, but everyone can learn it. You don't need to be able to read music to learn it, and you can do that quickly.
My goodness me! Well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to, have a sense of some other resources just like that later on in this discussion. But I feel we ought to take a couple of steps back. Fraser, could you, first of all, something I've always been meaning to ask you, Fraser Trainer is just the perfect name for a workshop leader. Is it real? Is it a stage name? Are you actually called Fred Lump? Or
Well, it's actually my real name, and when I go abroad, people say to me, "Is that your name or your job?" And they get really confused about it. How do these things happen?
Just blessed. You had a label on your forehead right from birth saying this man will be a world leader in the workshop leading context. So, I mean, I've introduced you as a workshop leader, but how would you talk about your musical identity?
Well, yeah, people ask you, well, what do you do? And, the first thing to say, I'm a musician. And actually, I'd probably say after that the next thing I'd say about it is that I'm a composer. Because everything I've done, either in the workshop scenario or working in schools or teaching is about creating music. And that's really what I feel is at the heart of my work. But yes, I do a lot of collaborative workshops and training musicians and teachers and some kind of more formal teaching and also concert presenting. So, I've had a portfolio career.
Yes.
You find yourselves working in lots of different contexts, in lots of different ways. And for me, that's what's really exciting and really nourishing about it. But the thing that's right at the heart has been creating new work, creating new music.
That's brilliant. And when did you take the leap, I suppose, from just composing at the piano, on a score, traditional models of that, and to group live composition and collaborative workshops? Was that something that was very much part of your identity from the get-go?
Things came together, pretty much at the same time. When I left school and I went to Huddersfield to do a music degree, and there was a very open-minded course there, which was very practical, and there were workshop processes going on in the university. I was also just starting to get my head around composing. So I didn't come to composing till I was 18, 19. And through those 3 years, actually, at Huddersfield, I identified that I was really interested in composition. I was really interested in education in terms of things like the London Sinfonietta were doing. They were taking musicians into schools and doing really creative things with students in schools, and also relating that back to the core repertoire of the London Sinfonietta and the artists and composers that they were working with. And I was interested in all that stuff, contemporary music, composers, schools, and it just suddenly, all came together. And then I went down to Guildhall, of course, where they had the performance communication skills course, postgraduate course there. They also had links with the London Sinfonietta, so it just really cemented the areas that I was looking to develop. So that kind of thing grew naturally with the idea of composing. It was right, well, how do we do that with a group of people? How do you share composition and work as a collective to create musical material?
And you were able to try stuff out in practice as both a sort of a live composer, if I can call it that, and a performer with Between the Notes.
Between the Notes, a great bunch of guys to work with, and we pretty much did anything. We pretty much tried anything once. So we would do some live improvisation in concerts. We did an improvisation CD for the BBC Music magazine where people sent in ideas, and we spent a weekend recording them. We would run creative projects with young people all over the world. We would commission composers to write for us, and I wrote for the group as well. And then that started to expand to writing pieces for the group and orchestras and young people to play. So it all started to spiral and feed off each other. And the five of us in the ensemble worked really well together. Very, very happy days, happy times, because I think we all had our strengths in slightly different areas which overlapped, and it made it a very strong, tight-knit unit that was really, really working well in lots of areas of all that through performance and composition and improvisation.
It's a dream team. It was a super group. I mean, I'm talking about it in the past. Do you guys still work together?
We've never officially closed the door on it, but we're all at very different stages in our careers and family lives now. And I think that the way things have just changed. The climate has changed. The scene has moved on. Money's much tighter. The idea of having a project where you've got 5 people sharing the leadership of it when really one or two of them could lead it. It is just not really workable for funders now. Although, I do think it was always going to be stronger when the five of us were working together, because we had such a good relationship and we were so close and tight. And I think that was a really good thing. People often used to comment on that, the participants and the people who were watching it. But it just, with funding being so tight, it just really wasn't a workable scenario for, in more recent years. So we still have done things recently. We've done much more in the way of improvisatory projects. We do a lovely program with Neil Ashdown where we get, into a room with an audience and he narrates stories from ideas that the audience give out, and we create the music to accompany, and it's a lovely, touching, poignant, and also very funny show that's just totally improvised.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
So we can do those things. But the days of doing, big projects in Cyprus or Bangladesh or Australia with, I think in Singapore, Hong Kong, we worked with 2,000 school children.
Wow.
Those things aren't happening now for us.
Sadly not, no. But let's hope that might yet come back to us in some shape or form. I want to sort of ask you about your practice now as a creative workshop leader, and I'm going to start with a stereotype, which is that you as a composer would be more naturally drawn to quite rigorous frameworks and starting points and have a quite complete picture of what the piece could be to get go, because that is your instinct and your training. And I'm going to sort of counterpoint that against the creative conversation I had. Number one, I hope viewers might check that out as well. That was with Sig Sabers-Griffiths, who I would describe as a sort of a master of the emergent and dealing with ideas as they gradually emerge and pouncing on them and making stuff out of them. So that is my stereotype image. I've set up a sort of kind of a spectrum there. Where do you sit on that spectrum actually?
There's no smoke without fire. Yeah. So, half of that does really resonate with me, so I love structure. I love organising music. I'm a composer. I like to, find sounds, find ways of working. I love process, really working through process to, come out artistically the other side of it with something. Some of that is true, although I think actually the bit about having a really clear imagination of what the end result is, I think if you're working in a creative scenario that's collaborative, you've actually got to let go of that.
Yeah.
You've got to be really open. So I think I had a conversation with Harrison Birtwistle once that when he really kind of put it in a very simple terms that really resonated with me, it was that you create your materials and you lay out your materials, the things you're going to build the piece with. But it's only once you've done that you then use those materials to form the structure of the piece. So, if you've got such a clear idea of what it's going to be from the outset and everything's in place, then you're going to be spending all your time, trying to fit that together and trying to ram the square pegs into the round holes. But if you want to, you create your materials, then you build with those materials, but you're not necessarily building a structure to a specific original plan. You're more flexible about that. And I think that's where I would resonate perhaps more with the approach you're talking about with Sig. And things can emerge and things can unfold and you can end up with something completely round the other way. But I do really love those processes and, that real getting to grips with material as a composer and working it and changing it and, developing it into something and then contrasting it with something else. Yeah.
Not least because it sounds great at the end, and you avoid a mushy soundscape. You've got something that has clear form, direction, and it's pleasing and complex or appears complex.
Yeah, and I think people respond to that. And we talked earlier about that Takita rhythm pattern. Those things really appeal to me because you can get complicated, sophisticated musical structures through simple means. And I think that's the art of the workshop leading. Simple starting points that everyone can jump on and inhabit. But what you get at the end is something much more than just those parts. You get something that's really inspiring and rigorous and sophisticated musically. And that's when I get really excited about it.
And which building materials do you enjoy working with? I mean, in an ideal scenario, what would you be using as your starting points? We've talked about that the complexity of that rhythm, or the apparent complexity of it. Actually, to me, I can see how you chunk it down, and you could sort of tease it into the memory that way. But what other kind of ways in do you use?
I'm a big fan of using rhythmic structures.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because, rhythm just naturally appeals to me anyway. It's one of the things I really like about music. I started off when I was really young, just playing the drums, and I never did anything with it, but that was my way into the very first bits of music making for me.
That's interesting.
Was pots and pans on the floor as a really young kid, and then having my dad buying me a drum kit. Of course, then I got onto a proper instrument after that, but I never lost that connection with rhythm. And I think rhythm is universal. Rhythm brings people together, brings different cultures together, different musical cultures, different groups of people. You can find a connection through rhythm somehow. And rhythms are commonly shared and passed around between different musical groups and cultures. Whereas perhaps, melody is something that highlights the differences and the characteristics of different musical cultures or groups of people. Thinking about rag and how that's put together and how, melody has developed in the West. So, in the workshop, you're going to use things that bind people together initially. To create a solid foundation and a solid start. Rhythms provide structure. I'm not saying that pitch can't do that, but it's much more tangible. If we say, right, we're going to play this 3 times, then we're going to play that rhythm 4 times, and then this one twice. You've built a structure in your rhythm that you can then decide what to do with next. How you're going to apply pitch, how you're going to apply harmony, melody, texture, instrumentation. I think it's just the way my brain has worked with music. I really like to break it down in its fundamental elements and then put it all back together again.
I can see how it's very.
Rather than thinking of that whole picture, as you say, and having an obsession about what the end result is, it's about taking the constituent elements and putting them back together and then applying the next one. And it means that Takita rhythm pattern can exist in many different forms, in many different ways. And, I've used it in my compositions, I've used it in my workshops, and sometimes it's hidden away, turned into something almost unrecognisable, and sometimes, it's more tangible.
I didn't realise.
That's a really good starting point.
It's interesting. It's been such a sort of a fertile starting point. This is clearly a world rhythm, Indian classical. Which other rhythmic frameworks have you used in the past that have been particularly fertile and fruitful?
Well, actually, most recently, I've really enjoyed what I've discovered in Indian classical music.
Okay.
Because it's particularly with South Indian music, there's a strong emphasis on really tight, organised rhythm structures. Having the rhythm sequence that might last, 32 beats or 18 beats or 16 beats, and everything arriving back at the one again. It's very mathematical. It's very organised. And then you set against that something completely opposite, which is improvisation. And yet the two are set together, but very different sides of the coin. and yet the improvisation doesn't just float over the top, it's totally allied to the rhythmic structure underneath. And I love the fact that in Indian music you get these little things called T-highs. Do you know T-highs are cadences, and they're little rhythmic patterns that are repeated 3 times, and the last note finishes on the one of the big cycle that you're working to. And that's just, I could just spend hours and days getting into that stuff and creating the material around those little structures and starting to organize music like that.
It's thrilling, isn't it, when it comes together, that kind of unison rhythmic, the homo rhythms when you get with the T-highs, or it immediately gives a neat edge to the sound, and it's thrilling.
And then you can find, ways that might connect through Western music, polyrhythms, could connect you over to African music, or it could connect you to ligeti and the kind of different polyrhythmic cycles that go on there, and I've composed with things like that, and I really enjoy that side of thing. It could connect you to Olivier Messiaen and the Quartet for the End of Time, where you've got these, never-ending rhythmic cycles that are set up against each other, and you never arrive at the moment where they all coincide. There's a timeless quality,
There's that almost like a funk groove in Messiaen. Do you know? It's. I'm trying to remember which movement it comes in, but you know the one. Anyway, that is a particularly good work to riff off, isn't it? The
exactly. So repertoire will give me those kind of starting points, and I really like looking at repertoire to find those things. And sometimes I just sit down on my own and try and work out. I don't know. I'm going to work out a 21 beat rhythm structure. And I'm going to divide that 21 beats into lots of different ways. 3 lots of 7, 7 lots of 3, 4 lots of 5 and a 1. Just get down in there and work it out. And we did that very practically with Between the Notes, which was really nice to do that together. We were almost a kind of constantly evolving workshop. And I remember coming up with some really nice things with the band. 13 beat bass cycles, or what did we do? Structures that would really naturally evolve, and that created complexity just by changing one little thing. Isorhythmic structures, where you'd set up a rhythm, and then the way the pitches fitted the rhythm didn't fit exactly, so they would just rotate around each other. Used to love things like that. Spend ages working on them. Really fruitful material.
I'm beginning to get a sense of how your mind works, and I have to say I'm envious of your ability to sort of hold those rhythmic patterns in mind. And although I'm a conductor by training and I'm used to mixed meter and all the rest of it, it's a different thing when you have to sort of internalise that and have that as part of your musical memory. Maybe moving on from rhythm, ideally, when it comes to melody and harmony, what kind of languages do you use there? I say ideally because I want to talk about sort of a blue sky scenario almost, where you've got no limitations. What would you be using?
Yeah, I mean that kind of blue sky scenario is quite a hard one for me to kind of focus on something really tangible, because I'm the kind of person that really likes a challenge.
Right.
I really like. I love having a response to repertoire, or having a response to a theme, or a particular goal to try and achieve in either the project or the composition.
Right.
And those things then kind of define the way that I might think about harmony, and the way I might think about melody, or or tonalities. So they're very kind of locked into whatever the project or the aim of the project is, or the repertoire stimulus, and I've done a lot of those projects with London Sinfonietta in the past, where you take the kind of working methods of a composer, say like Steve Reich or Sir Harrison Birtwistle, and you try and uncover 3 or 4 ways that those composers use material and work with material and then start to work with that creatively. And I find that really fruitful because, it's great to kind of fine tune and hone down the things that you're going to work on, rather than, you've got to make decisions. And composing is about making decisions. It's not easy to make those decisions, so anything that kind of brings that into focus I really enjoy, because then I can focus on the developmental process. I think if we were just talking about kind of naturally working in a kind of school environment or with youth groups and teenagers, I mean, I do really enjoy working modally with those groups harmonically, because I look for things that can create some kind of harmonic ambiguity about it, where it's death really for me if it's C major, and when I first started teaching, I was working with some 14-year-olds, 15 people in the class, and I just wanted to get a sense of what they could do. So I asked them to come to the piano and improvise something for 10 seconds on the piano, whatever they liked. It didn't matter what it was. And 14 out of the 15 of them started on middle C.
Right, that's interesting.
In their improvisations.
Yeah.
So it's about trying to unlock that. It's about trying to move away from the default. And if the default is like picking stuff off the shelf, like E minor or G minor or, concerto in D minor for piano and orchestra, then modal thinking is quite nice for that, because for a simple example, you can just say, we're going to play on the white notes of the piano, and then that modality can change just according to what you put in the bass, and suddenly you can move the harmony around, and again, very simply, without having much technique or experience, you can start to make harmonically sophisticated music. So I guess those are the things that I'm looking for, and that might be just a kind of general starting point. Not sure if it's a blue sky one, because I'm also really into, right, let's just write down a 12-note row, and then see what we can, see where it can go. But it's got to be the right context, hasn't it, for doing those kind of things.
I mean, who do you most like working with? Which age group and why?
Well, really enjoy working with adults, but I suppose in an education scenario, teenagers has been where I've really enjoyed working and where I've had a lot of success working, because there's a bit of challenge there, there's a little bit of kickback, and I love the idea that I can take something to a group that you might be forgiven for thinking they just wouldn't be interested in it. And it's not going to resonate. It's got nothing to do with their lives or the music that they're into. And just working with that and just trying to find the connections. So I'm often looking for connections between those kind of things that I bring in, which are new, and then the things that the people I'm working with might have access to or might enjoy or might, feel good about. Is there anything that's going on here that's connected? Can you just broaden people's thinking experience, open their ears a little bit more, not expecting them to go away and suddenly be great fans of the music of Harrison Birtwistle, but just to know something about it, to have a connection with it, even if it's to the extent of going, well, that does that, I like to do things this way, and just even that kind of reaction to it, I think is really positive.
Kind of a provocation, isn't it, in that way?
Yeah.
I mean, you've mentioned Harrison Birtwistle now as name twice, which is interesting, quite telling, and not entirely surprising given your background in Huddersfield and that wonderfully kind of free modern approach that they espouse up there. Who else has been, your influences? I mean, who have you learned not just from composers but perhaps from artists?
Well, I think probably just going back in a kind of chronological order. Up at Huddersfield was Richard Steinitz, who, do you know Richard? He ran the Contemporary Music Festival there.
I know of him because of that.
I'm not sure how many years. And he was my first composition teacher.
Oh, lucky you.
And he was amazing, and they were very special hours that I would spend in his room having my one-to-one composition lesson. And that really was a solid, wonderful foundation, and he just knew so much music. If I just wrote 3 or 4 notes down on a scrappy bit of paper trying to do something, he'd be able to say, "Oh, it's like this," or "Oh, so and so tries to do something like this." He'd go to a composer or a piece, or always have somewhere to direct me, and I thought that was just wonderful and fruitful and great to have that. Gillian Moore, then at the London Sinfonietta. Gillian was the first full-time education manager in the UK in the 80s, later to become artistic director of the London Sinfonietta, now at the South Bank. What was wonderful about Gillian was that she made you feel really valued, made you feel, and at that time I was just the education projects coordinator in the London Sinfonietta, but she made you feel you were really important to the organisation. You had a really important role to play, and the work you were doing was really fundamental. And that filled you with confidence and made you feel you could do anything, made you feel you could take risks and try things, even if they weren't to work out. And she was wonderful in a school classroom with secondary school kids, in inner city London, or she could be talking to Pierre Boulez. And just to be, my ambition was to try and be comfortable in those situations, because I wanted to be in all those situations. I wanted to be able to work with a bunch of prisoners in wormwood scrubs, and I wanted to be able to have a conversation with Pierre Boulez about something that he'd written. That was just a great place to try and be, and she was absolutely that. Mark Anthony Turnage, in terms of composers. Mark and I were really close for about 10 years, and it was at the time when he was just getting to the end of his Birmingham residency with the symphony orchestra, and I went to quite a lot of his premieres and rehearsals, and he was really welcoming and friendly, and would talk about his process, and we'd go to his studio, and it was great. I got a window into what it was like to be that kind of composer. He taught me those kind of things, and it's great music, I think. And he also has a fascination with rhythm and with jazz, funk, and soul, and the orchestra, and getting a really rich palette of sonorities and some really kick-ass rhythmic qualities in his music. So that all appealed to me, and that was really inspiring.
I can imagine. All people then who have kept your mind wide open in a way, whether it's in the field of how you communicate verbally and hold a space with various different communities, through to just the wide framework of reference that you have as a musician to draw on, whether it's those kind of rhythms or contemporary schools or whatever. So that's really interesting.
And also being around the London Sinfonietta, just because of the organisation they were, they didn't ally themselves to one particular school of composition. So, I met lots of composers and, was introduced to lots of music just by being around the Sinfonietta, and got to see people like Nigel Osborne run workshops, and incredible musical mind, musical facility, and knowledge of music. Just to be around those people and get a little bit of something from them was amazing. And then just lots of different composers, great composers, at the London Sinfonietta. Giorgi Ligeti, I remember, his piano concerto premiere at the Barbican, and seeing those people talk to kids that I'd been working with. Was really stimulating. So you felt you could, through a project, you could set up a scenario where a 15-year-old school kid from London could talk to Giorgi Ligeti about.
It's amazing just to think of that.
And they felt confident enough to say why what they'd made was better than what he did.
Isn't that great? What a great conversation. I mean, that brings me, I suppose, to what, sadly, just looking at the time, is probably going to be our final question. It's a rather large one, though, and it's about the role of creativity as part of the pedagogy in the curriculum. You've been talking about the London Sinfonietta's approach and how successful that was and probably still is. Have you any other thoughts on that whole connection and how realistic it is to try, the kind of creative responses you've been describing to set works, for example?
Well, so my connection with that at the moment is that I'm currently taking this time that we're, under COVID restrictions to do a PGCE.
Great.
So I'm working in a school and, seeing how all that works, and trying to learn as much as I can about what it's like to be a teacher and how music is taught in schools and the curriculum and just, all of that side of things. And it is hard, and I don't feel I'm an expert on that at all yet after just having been in the school for 6 months. But it seems that they are very different scenarios, from the kind of creative workshop leading to the school class teaching. Your class usually is about 45 minutes long. Key stage 3, you've got 30 kids, from all different backgrounds, all different levels of experience with music. Some of them will say they actively don't like music, or that they don't like their music lessons. Whereas in a workshop scenario, you've usually got much longer periods of time. Your session might last 2 hours, or even 3 hours, or even a whole day or 3 days.
Yeah.
So the time scale is totally different. You usually have young people there. You're in that scenario who've opted to be there. They've made a decision to be there. Music is already something that they're interested in and passionate about. And I suppose the other thing is that in the school, there's a lot of emphasis, and this might sound really obvious, placed on learning.
Oh, wow.
And people have got to learn stuff.
Are you sure?
You've got to show that they've learnt it as well, and you have to show that in every 45-minute lesson. It's not just something that we have to demonstrate with a summative assessment at the end of a year or a term. Whereas the workshop scenario, the learning is definitely secondary. Now, learning probably will happen, in these scenarios, because it just will come out. But it's definitely secondary. And the things I'm thinking about are how to get the best quality composition process going, or maybe we've got an outcome to this project which is going to be on stage at the proms at the Royal Albert Hall or something. So those are the things that are your real priorities in that scenario. So it's very different. And then creatively, that means something as well, because for composition in schools, you've got to demonstrate that you can use the techniques, which is different to being a composer who uses the techniques to create the best kind of piece of music that they can create. Because a composer might do that with actually really limited techniques, but just use that technique again and again to create this sonic structure that does something, that really communicates something, but it's really obsessive. And composers don't write pieces to show everything that they know so much, or if they do, they're usually not the most successful pieces.
Very device laden.
It's a very different thing in a 5-minute composition at GCSE level. You've got to show maybe that you can use 2 or 3 of these techniques, and you can handle harmony, and that what a first inversion chord is, and you can modulate to the dominant. So this is creatively restricting, and those might be useful things to know, but I feel we've lost a little bit of that individuality, and that openness and that vision, and the fact that someone can do something weird and wonderful, and be obsessive about an idea or a way of working. Could write a piece that's only got 3 notes in it, for example.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be as a negative thing. And I think a lot of teachers feel concerned that if someone does something like that it won't turn out for the best in the results, once the examiner's looked at it, and therefore that brings everything down, and ultimately the pressure is on for the results to be as high as possible.
So you're describing really the logistical constraints of the assessment framework there, and that it becomes a bit of a tick box exercise rather than a truly free creative one, even though you have a free brief in both GCSE and A level. But even there, you're mindful, aren't you, of certain things that are being looked for and scrutinised. Is there a middle ground then between, or is it a matter of just looking at that assessment framework and saying, well, this doesn't match up to what we're trying to encourage and advocate for in children as musicians?
Yeah, I think it's the assessment and also the curriculum and the vision of what we want that to be. And, it's really hard. I don't really have an answer for that at the moment, because in the school situation, you are trying to teach music to everybody. And you're trying to teach it not only to people who are enthusiastic and maybe want to go on and do A-level and then go and study music at university or music college, but you're trying to teach it alongside all the other subjects to students that just are going to inhabit music for their music lessons, but they still need to learn stuff, and they still need to do creative things, and they need to find their way in creativity. So you can see why the parameters get narrowed, and it's, everyone will learn to do this thing.
Yeah.
And, there are 3 levels that you might do it at.
Yeah.
But everything just gets tighter and narrower and to be honest, less creative and inventive.
It has to be standardised, doesn't it, as part of the system?
I'm not sure if that is really composing what we say it is in the curriculum. Obviously, it's got elements of it, but I think that needs looking at, and it would just be great to feel that we are opening up the upper levels of that to really incorporate students' imagination and creativity, that we believe they can do that kind of stuff, that they can be that inventive. And I suppose it then feeds back into the way that you prepare the students right from the start, because if you could work towards that, and that was a possibility, you might start to teach the early stages of composition in a different way. So there's a lot of emphasis on genre, and a lot of emphasis on the default is theme and variations, as I see it, because it's really clear what that is. So it's really tangible, and you can see why everyone can engage with that. Yeah. And it is an important thing to inhabit, I think, as a composer. Variations are great, and I think as a fundamental tool for composers, if we think about variations, that's really useful for the idea of developing material.
Sure.
But there are lots of other ways to envisage a shape of a piece of music and what it might do.
Well, to be continued perhaps in our comment thread below. I think you've opened up a fascinating conversation there, so thank you so much for that. And obviously I wish you lots of luck as a teacher, but also I'm hoping that the community of music leaders won't you won't be lost to us, because you've been such a sort of a shining light. So you'll keep involved, won't you?
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm really planning to use what I'm learning about teaching and music in schools in my creative work, wherever that takes me. So, it's just my time for learning and nourishment and finding out how to use that effectively. And
brilliant. Well, thank you so much again, Fraser, for sharing all of that, and
pleasure.
Wish you luck in the post-COVID world, whatever that entails for you. And as I said, please do come in with your comments below. We'd love to hear what questions are relevant to you as creators and as educators, and see what conversations we can usefully continue. So, but for now, thank you so much, Fraser, and to everybody out there, good luck in your creative work. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.